Well, Mr. President, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure.
And bienvenidos a los Estados Unidos.
Muchas gracias.
You had a chance to meet with Vice President Harris, but also President Biden.
Yes, indeed.
To discuss various issues. How did you find the president? How do you think he is?
Oh, he was enchanting. He was in a great mood, and we had a very nice discussion. Very warm, I would say.
And you spent a considerable amount of time with the vice president.
Well, with the vice president, we had a working session with our teams, and we had a review of several issues in the bilateral agenda. The previous week, we had in Guatemala the first high-level economic dialogue, which is a mechanism the United States establishes with some countries to expedite and facilitate the development of economic relations. More than, I think it was 14 US agencies participated in the meeting. And of course, with the officers from every branch practically of our government, we reviewed a range of issues from infrastructure to cooperation to investment to climate change too. It was really a wide agenda. And 2 days later, we had the visit of Secretary Mayorkas for a meeting reviewing issues of security and migration. So the visit with the Vice President Harris was one which allowed us to check on the advance that we had in the meetings the previous week, and then start to work on the agenda that we are developing now.
The vice president is assigned by the president to deal with the root causes of the immigration issue. Based on your meetings with her, do you think she understands what the root causes are?
Oh yeah, very clearly. And that's what has allowed us to have a very clear convergence around issues of planning and basically the root causes of migration are poverty and insecurity. So addressing those root causes are the only means by which any government is going to stop the flow of people leaving our countries, in my case, in Guatemala, living from the regions of the country where people do not find a future because there are no job opportunities, because there is no support to whatever they wish to do, open a business or not, and are the regions of the country where you have the highest concentration of poverty, of malnutrition, is the concentration of indigenous population. So we are very clear that it is in developing those parts of the country that we're going to be able to develop the type of well-being that will prevent people from marching on to finding a future in other places.
Back in 2021, when she visited Guatemala, the vice president famously said,
"Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border."
Do you think anyone listened?
Well, I don't know, you do the numbers, but what we are doing is that we're working together because what we agree is that we have to work to allow people what we call the right to stay. People have a right to remain in their places. People need to find opportunities. People go to other countries to look for a future only if they do not find work or are fleeing from whatever political or natural disaster. Otherwise, they stay where their communities are. They want to stay with their loved ones, with their communities. But governments have not, in my country, have not been investing public development infrastructure in those places. And that's what we believe, that we need to build the capacity to develop their productivity as individuals, as human beings, and let them exercise their right to stay.
You know, and most Guatemalans know, most Guatemalans stay put. Majority of them still live in Guatemala. Many, of course, do leave. For those that go, what is your understanding of why they're leaving?
Well, almost 20% of the Guatemalans living today are abroad, and mostly in the United States. And this is a huge amount of our population. The people continue to go out of the country, and they are doing so particularly from those regions where you cannot find work or economic opportunities. We have a population that lives under 60%. 60% of our population lives under the line of poverty. We have 70% of our economically active population in the informal sector, meaning they don't have access to formal services, they do not participate in the economy, they have very limited access to poor quality services in education, in health, and so on. So it is those that are staying are because they are looking at the moment in which they might begin marching on. And those that are coming here are the ones that are daring. For us, migration into other countries, into the United States or Canada or wherever, is actually draining our country of energy, of creativity, of the people that we need to build a developed country.
You said in your meeting with the Vice President yesterday, quote, that you recognize that many of the problems we face are structural and long-standing and cannot be solved in a short period of time.
Exactly.
Nor without support and cooperation from the United States and other key international friends. With respect, why should the United States keep sending money to help Guatemala?
What we are trying to say is fundamentally about cooperation is not sending money. Cooperation can be by creating conditions in which we can invite you to invest in Guatemala and establish factories, works that can begin to produce and create jobs. That's fundamentally what we are most interested in. And we believe our country presents huge opportunities for investment and the development of factories that can then bring products back into the United States or export to other places over the world. So international cooperation is a fundamental principle which is good for everybody.
And to those that might think, you know, the United States has been trying to help this region for so long and it doesn't seem to stop the flow of migrants, what would you say?
Well, because there has been scant attention to the critical issues of focusing on good governance. When you have governments that concentrate on, that stop corruption and graft, that fight corruption, and that begin to invest into development, then you're going to have the results that you need. And the countries in Latin America, in which you have this type of governments and regimes which are working, are governments in which people are voting to stay in, want to stay in. People do not migrate by choice. They migrate because the conditions force them to do it. So helping develop healthy economies, helping fight corruption is one of the best ways to develop solid governments and conditions of governance that can help foster development for everyone.
And that was one of the big reasons why you won election, is because you committed to tackling corruption.
And because we believe that corruption is the most urgent problem, but the most important problem is development. But if we do not fight corruption, we are not going to be able to get the development that we need so that people can flourish and stay.
At the end of your 4-year term, then, you're vowing that the incidence of corruption, at least across society, will be down?
Look, we have a situation now in which for the last 20 years, we have had criminal political gangs co-opting state institutions and turning institutions into machines for graft, for corruption of every kind, etc. We have already stopped that. But we are very, very aware that there is a penetration of these networks in every space in society, and we're going to be fighting them. What you can already see is a government that has stopped dishing out public money as a way to finance the corruption networks, and that's how the country worked in the last 20 years.
I think another question a lot of Americans have is, if we know that people are coming from as far away as Venezuela, coming from Cuba and Nicaragua, they have to go through Guatemala, get to Mexico, and then the United States. Why don't they stop these migrants in Guatemala and turn them around?
We are, if they are Central American, they are citizens of Guatemala by our constitution. Every Central American is Guatemalan by law and has freedom of transit if they are very well documented. And in the other cases, we have treaties, and if they are documented, we treat them and we stop them. We work with them. Those who are undocumented, we do not allow in. Those that are documented, then they continue.
And you know full well that many of them may be going on to Mexico and trying to get into the United States or Canada.
Well, that some of them might, and but if they are legally present there, then what we are working now is on mechanisms that can establish ways in which we can ascertain where they are going and how this is happening.
And the State Department has set up these centers where they're encouraging people to apply for either asylum or for residency in Guatemala and Colombia and other places. Have you seen any of these processing centers?
Yes, there's been offices working in Guatemala, and we have, I think, 3 or 4 established in different parts of the country.
Do you get any sense that people actually show up and use those services?
Well, there's a review of how these are working, but they are working.
They are working. Okay. You know that there's a chance later this year Donald Trump may win the White House again in this country. He's somebody who has a far different view of how immigration should be handled, and has said things like migrants are not people. He's called them animals, and says they speak languages that Americans don't know. When you hear someone say that about people who are trying to get into this country, what do you think?
Well, I think that in general it is a huge mistake to dehumanize and criminalize people that are just exercising, which is a fundamental right, the right to move. Migration has been with the human civilization since the day Lucy walked out of the Rift Valley in Kenya, and they continue walking in search of different places. And we have to understand the problem and to begin to understand exactly what are all the conditions that happen around this problem in order to be able to solve it. Otherwise, the problem is not going to be solved, whatever we consider about or qualify what is happening.
Do you think migrants will be safe in the United States if Donald Trump is elected president again?
Well, we are looking forward to work with whoever wins in the next election to support and work so that our citizens that are residents in the United States enjoy full rights.
Do you think border walls work?
I think that history shows they don't.
So it may not be worth the expense of trying to build one again.
What we need to look is for integrated solutions to a problem that is far more complex than just putting a wall to try to contain. And that's why international cooperation is fundamental, to try to understand the problem and then think on solutions that work on the mid to long term and are just not, short-term reactions that, as we have seen in history, do not work.
I guess I have 2 more questions, but I want to button up what you said regarding investment in this country, or in Guatemala. You're essentially saying the doors are open for business and
Indeed.
American companies should come and invest.
American, European, Japanese, doors are open.
And I wanted to ask you one other question regarding the journalist Jose Zamora.
Yes, of course.
Who's been imprisoned in
Yes.
Guatemala now for more than a year, I think more than 2 years almost now. Do you support his release?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, the first thing that we did on the 15th of January, the morrow of my inauguration. I sent the Minister of Interior, who is in charge of penitentiaries, to visit José Rubén Zamorán to immediately transform the conditions of detainment that he was being subjected to. He was being subject to conditions that were tantamount to torture and to just trying to humiliate him. Those were transformed insofar as we can within our legal regime, and we cannot interfere with the courts of justice. There is a separation of powers in my country, but we are now sure that the conditions in which of his detainment are fully in compliance with dignity and the best that we can provide in our case.
And at this point, do you have any sense of how long it might take for him to be released?
Well, that we would hope for him to be released tomorrow, because we know that this is just an example of the type of I don't know how to describe this. Well, the lawfare, the use of justice for whatever purpose. We know that the accusations are just not serious, but we cannot interfere with the Court of Justice, so we don't know.
And if he's ever released, do you support him returning to his work as a journalist and covering your government like any other?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if there are allegations of corruption, to cover them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have actually came out very strongly for freedom of press, freedom of information. We have reopened the doors of the National Palace, and now the press has a how do you call them? A room.
A filing center.
At the National Palace, which was closed before. We are actually bringing forward mechanisms that can ensure the defense and protection of journalists, human rights defenders, and other actors.
So the free press is back in Guatemala.
The free press is back in Guatemala.
All right. Mr. President, thank you so much.